Okay. All right. Welcome well, let me start the other recording just as a backup. Hang on one sec. All right. Welcome everyone to how open source communities are shaping digital currency innovation. This is a Morgan State seminar in partnership with the FinTech Center at Morgan State University. And we are incredibly proud to work with Morgan State University on this series of discussions and presentations. This is Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust. We are the Linux Foundation's flagship organization for the development and deployment of decentralized systems and technology. As with all Linux Foundation events and meetings, this is held under the Linux Foundation antitrust policy. If you have any questions about these matters, please contact your company counsel, or if you're a member of the Linux Foundation, feel free to contact Andrew Updegrove of the firm Gesmer Updegrove LLP, which provides legal counsel to the Linux Foundation. And more importantly, this is held under the Linux Foundation Code of Conduct. I'll be sharing a link to this in a moment. But the best way to sum up our code of conduct is be excellent to each other, be kind to each other, be respectful of each other, and it's going to be great. And with that, I'm going to, oh, wait, one last slide. Please get involved. Sign up for a Linux Foundation account. Check out our code on GitHub. I'll share some links in a moment. Look at our communication channels like Discord, like our wiki. This event and the recording for it will be shared on our wiki, as well as check out our YouTube channel. We have a number of really great Morgan State seminars and other workshops and community calls all recorded and up there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Ali Emdad.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate this collaboration between the Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust, your efforts, and also we thank Karen, one of the top experts in this area, who will share her expertise and knowledge with us. I wanted to mention that this dovetails, this workshop or this webinar dovetails to our last week's webinar on stablecoins. So it's a very timely event for us. The mission of the center, the National FinTech Center, is to expand capacity and bandwidth at more than 60 HBCUs in the areas of blockchain, fintech, and other new technologies. We are extremely grateful for LFDD for helping organize this webinar. We thank Karen again. And with that, I want to mention that this webinar is going to be recorded, and we share it with our faculty and students through our website, and it's going to be part of their instructional package that they use in these areas. Thank you so much. With that, back to Sean.
Thank you, Professor. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Karen. Karen Otoni.
Thank you.
Karen is the Senior Director of Ecosystem and Strategic Initiatives at Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust. She's also an expert in digital currency innovation, and she's done more work in this space. I've been doing this a while than anyone I know, and this is going to be a treat. So thank you, Karen. You have the rest of the time. It's all yours.
Thank you. Do you still actually,
I'm seeing a webinar for India, Karen, on your screen.
I know, I don't know why it does that. So hold on, let me do this again.
Not a problem, not a problem.
I lost the window. This window. How does that look?
Looking good. LF Decentralized Trust, Karen.
Finally. Hopefully we'll stay there. I was trying to make it so that I could see the chat while I do this in slideshow, but every time I try and click that way, it goes to another thing. So
no worries. I will monitor.
You'll have to tell me what's in the chat.
Happily.
All right. Well, thank you, Ali, for having me here, Professor Emdad, and Sean for the warm welcome. I'm excited to speak with you here today. I really want this to be a dialogue, hence why I wanted to see the chat. But feel free to jump in with questions along the way. I'll try to keep it within time, so we have time at the end for questions. But I don't mind stopping along the way if things come up. So I am here to talk about open source really, and how our open source community specifically, but just how open source in general can benefit what we see happening in digital currencies, in digital currency innovation today. If you're not familiar with LF Decentralized Trust, we are the home for decentralized technologies at the Linux Foundation. We are part of the Linux Foundation, which is a broader umbrella organization that hosts open source code projects in a variety of industries and applications. And at LF Decentralized Trust, we focus on the decentralized space. We believe that the future of decentralized technologies is open. It's open sourced, it's openly developed, and openly governed. And I will talk more about each of these terms later on. We have a very diverse ecosystem of both technologies, but also industries and use cases in which our technologies are being used and leveraged. But today I'm going to focus on the financial industry. Our community is 9 years, almost 10 years in the making. We have hundreds of enterprises that are part of our community using our technologies, 7 graduated projects, 10 incubating, and many, many more in the labs. We even have 1 standards project now as part of LF Decentralized Trust. Many regional chapters. So if you're a student that comes from a different area of the world, we probably have a regional chapter close to you, and we invite you to engage with those chapters there as well, in addition to the many meetup groups that we have in hundreds of cities around the world as well. We have a large landscape of various different technologies. I won't be getting into the specifics of these technologies today, but just wanted to show you all that we have going on at LF Decentralized Trust. We've got the ledger technologies there. These are the DLTs that serve either general purpose use cases, or some of them are focused on one kind of use case like identity. Some can be used just in private permission networks. Others can be used in public as well. We have interoperability tools, integration and implementation tools as well. A real deep focus on decentralized identity in our community, and also cryptography as well. We have a very broad ecosystem of enterprises participating. At the top, you'll see these are our premier members who take leadership on our governing board, but we have many other general members from across the globe as well, including many universities, government institutions, and various associations in this space as well. So I mentioned these earlier. So what do I mean by open source? So open source simply means that the code is essentially public. It's published under a license that allows anyone to use, evaluate, or contribute to that code and build on it for any purpose. So that's pretty fair, straight, and simple. Open development, though, takes things a little bit further. It means that you have not just open source code, but you have a community around that open source code that is actively building and developing the code and continuing to contribute to it. And then what we mean by open governance is that we have clearly openly identified procedures and rules for how that community that is building around that open source code makes decisions, gets leadership positions, for example, like the path to maintainership. That's openly defined, and for anyone to get on those paths. When I speak with various different audiences, sometimes there's a hesitancy about open source. It sounds, especially when we're talking to those in the financial space, they're heavily regulated institutions. They're institutions that depend heavily on reputation, and there's strong adverse to reputational risk. And so just the word open can sometimes seem scary. And so, what I like to emphasize here is that most of the time, actually probably 100% of the time, all these organizations are already using open source software. They just don't realize it. The internet itself runs on Linux. We had our LF annual report, which shows that 73% of organizations are using Linux. And of course, most smartphones, all of the most of the top servers, cloud infrastructure, and all of the world's supercomputers run on Linux software, which is open source software. Um, uh, another point that I like to highlight is that most of what you see out there that seems like a product or closed source software is actually built on top of open source software itself. 90% of a modern applications code base is actually open source, with only about 10% or so being customized. We also have this report that came out a couple years ago focusing on open source globally. And it found that governments actually benefit a lot from more investment and engagement in open source. There is this concept of digital public good infrastructure that, especially in Europe, and even I think the UN has some goals around this, around improving digital public goods and good infrastructure. And open source really aligns with those goals. So why open source code in the first place? Why not just keep it to ourselves, right? And maximize what we can get from it. A big part of it is people trust code that is open more than not, because they're able to look at it, they're able to verify it, and it can actually be more secure as a result of all of that. You can even have others use and contribute, obviously, which enhances the efficiencies of open source by having people work together, even for those that are still competing. And I'll touch on this concept a little bit more along this talk as well. The larger the ecosystem around a piece of open source code ensures that even if one organization goes away, the development can continue. Hold on one second. I have someone at the door. So, this is what I'd like to focus on for the rest of the call is that we believe that for digital currencies to be as innovative as they can be and really take the use case as far as organizations, governments, institutions want it to go, that we believe that open development is the foundation for that. Why? Because the power of a community, in our view, will always outperform the power of a single company. We see this every day in our ecosystem here at LF Decentralized Trust, especially when we are talking about building a new financial ecosystem. This sort of ecosystem cannot be built in a vacuum. It's going to take collaboration. We're defining the new rails. It isn't going to be any one actor that wins the race and defines those rails. It's going to be a collaborative effort if we really want it to succeed and be interoperable. We're charting new territory, right? Transparency and openness are key requirements for trust in this new financial system. And with value needing to move across various systems, a neutral technology infrastructure is all the more important. And will make this technology or whatever technologies are being used more production ready as a result. Open source really helps drive innovation because of this optionality where you have actually vendor competition that is healthy, but also we are neutral. So rather than working with one organization, you have the option to work with many different organizations for your services. And thus there's more options. You're not dependent on the success of any one company. You also avoid the duplication of efforts. So most of these projects, for example, a lot of these CBDC projects that are being done, central bank digital currency, most of them are being built, in a closed environment. But many are probably reusing and rebuilding the same thing over and over again, which is great for certain service providers, of course, but not great for the use case overall or for the efficiency of these government public funds. And so the more that you can open source what is common base infrastructure, what's something that everyone will leverage and not anyone is really competing on, you avoid those inefficiencies. What's openly developed can also is also more likely to become a common standard, just because if you have a large community, a lot of people are working on it, it can become then the default standard where things are tested against them. Can also drive lower prices overall and switching costs. And then vendors can focus their R&D resources into what differentiates them, into the differentiating aspects of products and services that they can build on top of that common layer. The Apache 2.0 license that the Linux Foundation uses protects the contributions made to an open source community while allowing that innovation to flourish. So one thing that kind of comes up a lot when we talk to audiences in the financial space is they'll say, well, I don't want to share everything, like how I can't share, we can't share our secrets, right? And so what's important to understand is that there's different layers to a solution. There's different layers to open source technology. Often you will have a common base layer that is fairly commoditized, that everyone can then leverage. Then custom code built on top of that. And then for that custom code, you actually use open source libraries to help address issues. And so there's this, sort of sandwich, the hamburger, as we call it, of open source code. Any questions so far?
Karen, we don't have any questions in chat. If
Okay.
someone does have a question, please put it in chat in the next break. We'll ask it. Go for it.
Yeah. There's 4 factors that enable successful open source communities. There's more, but these are the ones I'm going to highlight. Is again this philosophy of open governance, duocracy. The most successful projects that stand the test of time have neutral open governance models where those who do the work are the ones who make the decisions, and that there's a clear path to that kind of leadership in the community. The IP clarity as well, so that it's very clear on how those can get involved as a contributor and implement also as a user. The commercial support ecosystem, encouraging those vendors again to build on top of it and create that ecosystem that's using and building on top of the technologies. And then also the neutral home. So Linux Foundation acts as one of those neutral homes. And the reason being that even if one organization wants to, in good faith, share their work, and they want to open source that technology. And I'll get into some of these models in a minute. It's still, they still have control of it, right? They can always turn the GitHub off. And so that's why it's important to host the code in a neutral organization where, we won't ever do that unless the community decides that they want to turn it off, right? And close down the project. But essentially, you have that, again, vendor neutrality. You're not dependent on any one organization. There are drawbacks, and that's important to recognize, right? You do have somewhat less control. It depends on how you open source, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then from a business perspective, competitors can actually use your code too. So it's important to have a good strategy around what you do open source and what you don't. Think back to the hamburger of open sourcing. There's a lot of drawbacks for enterprises that are relevant for enterprises versus governments. And there will be bugs, and there's varying levels of comfort with that. When I speak with financial institutions, most of them are again, are risk adverse, and focus significantly on reputational risk as well, and don't want people to see that there are vulnerabilities because they feel that there will actually then be less trust in the code. But as Hart Montgomery, our CTO, often says when we're in these meetings together, is that if you one could argue that if you don't feel comfortable sharing your code openly, then your code isn't actually ready for production. And so it's just a very different paradigm shift in how you establish trust and what security means. And so that's something that's a conversation that we have ongoing with many actors in the financial space. So some of these misconceptions kind of funnel out to be security, provenance, and the scope, right? So we don't trust this open process. You can argue, again, that you have more security by people being able to see the bugs, but that's some of those misconceptions that I've addressed, right? You can actually address those bugs more easily. And in fact, we can point to some of these recent big bugs that have happened that were able to be addressed quickly because the code is open source and the bugs were flagged, even though they were big bugs. There's also the provenance. We don't know who built it. And again, they already are engaged in open source already. They're already using Linux and Python and are leveraging commercial support with companies like Intel, Google, or Red Hat. So, sometimes there can be this myopic view of like, just because we're dealing with a new financial infrastructure, it doesn't necessarily mean that like your perspective necessarily you haven't already gone through this process before. And then again, the scope, not doing all the different parts, figuring out what the scope is. Again, you don't have to open everything. You only open what's relevant and what will actually help the broader use case advance. Because again, you can't really go it alone in what is essentially a network use case. Just to dive in a little bit deeper on the security aspect, we have, because I want to highlight this project that we have at the Linux Foundation. One good example that we always share as well is that all the world's most critical infrastructure software, cryptography, and other protocols that secure the internet are all open source. But of course, you do have to have good practices. There are better communities than other. A lot of it is related to whether or not they are simply open source communities or are they openly developed and openly governed, which I highlighted earlier. We have this project at the Linux Foundation called OpenSSF, Open Source Security Foundation, and they focus on providing different tools, guides, checklists, and a community of experts that you can engage with around helping open source become more secure. So I encourage you to look at that if that's something that you're interested in. So I mentioned earlier that not all open source is necessarily the same. And so that's true. So it's important to be aware of that so that you can be a good evaluator of open source projects. We've organized these into broadly 4 categories. I'm sure there are more, but these are the ones we kind of like to highlight in this example. So there's open source code that's simply what we call public demonstration. So it's simply someone saying, you know, I want to demonstrate that I'm transparent and I just publish publicly. There isn't a roadmap, there isn't necessarily a community that's being built around it. It's just publishing. The next step, it goes a little bit further. There is an open product that one company or entity can open source a piece of software. It doesn't necessarily allow outside contributions, but maybe it has a roadmap, some regular releases. Maybe they follow some best security practices, but still it's all held by that one company and they control it. So it's a little bit more, they're sharing more information about how it's being built, but it's still not fully openly governed. Then we have an organization that's a benevolent dictator. They open source their code. They allow external contributions, but the ultimate authority, the maintainers of that code, is from this benevolent organization. So they're leveraging the benefits of community contributions, but that community doesn't get to advance into decision-making positions. And so again, that's not an openly governed project. It's still considered an open source project. Many companies, when they open source, it's under this model, and they say they are fully open source, but this is usually the model it's followed if it's not hosted at a neutral home. So in openly governed open source projects, you have code that has transparent documentation, a meritocratic governance. So any contributor can become, in principle, a maintainer if they want to. And there's a path for that. It's hosted under a third-party entity, like the Linux Foundation or somewhere else. Anyone can join and contribute. It's inclusive, and there is, again, this clear public process for leadership. So the projects at the Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust and many Linux Foundation projects fall into this category, and this is what we try to work towards and espouse in the space of digital currencies, but in all spaces as well, in all industries where open source code is being used. Let me pause there real quick and do a time check, because I could go deeper into each of these and show the benefit and drawback of it, if that's of interest to you. If not, I can skip that and kind of start getting into some examples of digital currency applications with our open source code.
And if you've got a question for Karen, please post it in chat.
I finally got the chat window here. I will run through each of these real quick.
Cool.
Since I think I have some time. I have to end I'll try to end at 45.
Yes.
So
Great. Thanks, Karen.
that sound good? Okay. Please categorize the EOS governance model for all LFDZ projects. I don't know if I could do that right now.
Karen, keep going. I'll try to answer that question.
Okay. So public demonstration, that was the first one that I talked about. What are the benefits of it? Well, third parties can audit your code and see what you're doing. You can show off, right? There's security advantages, and you can benefit from others can benefit from seeing what decisions you made around your code. The drawbacks are if you're not doing well, people will know and be able to see, but outsiders can't contribute to help you make it better. And the biggest drawback, though, is that the people are unlikely to use your code since they effectively can't maintain it themselves. Open product has all the benefits of the first category. They're a little bit more likely to use your code because they can see that, okay, someone's supporting it. You have the benefit of maintaining more control. But some of the drawbacks are that outsiders obviously still can't contribute. They can't affect change and therefore less inclined to use your software. And you'll see there's this real tension between openness and what's the word I'm looking for? I guess adoption or use. There's also the drawback is you require high level trust in the company, which some companies may have, right? Or some institutions may have. And so this may be relevant for those cases. Then in the benevolent dictator model, which I mentioned is very common with companies, is you've got all the previous benefits I've mentioned. Outsiders can contribute, which makes you more efficient, right? You don't have to hire as many engineers, perhaps. Maybe people will use the code more because they can actually fix some of the things that don't work for them. But again, a benefit here is that you ultimately retain control if that's what you're looking for. But again, same drawback as the others. If the more control you have, the less it may become a standard, the less widely it might be used. And you may not get the quality or expert contributions that maybe you're looking for. And then, of course, in the openly governed project, you have all the benefits of the previous ones. There's more incentivization to contribute because they can play a role that is proportional to those contributions. You develop a more diverse group of contributors, which contributes to the stability and sustainability of the project itself. The drawback is that you lose that control, right? This is not your project anymore. It is everybody's project. It's the community's project. And so, sometimes that is, hard for certain organizations. Other groups obviously can contribute and have proportional governance, which may erode your own control of the project. In practice, I find, that when organizations contribute, and they are actively involved in maintaining it, they, still do, even though it's open, still do maintain a lot of that control. So in some ways that's, it is a drawback, but it's not, I think, as significant as a drawback as it might seem. Because if you develop that code, you obviously have a lot of investment in it, and you will continue to be to do the work that leads you to have that proportional leadership role. So why use the Linux space as a home for your open source project? It's neutral, so you don't have that worry about one organization dominating. It's not easy to put together an open source community project, and ask Sean, who's heavily involved in this in our community. We have staff that obviously are experienced in building these communities, and there's shared resources across us as an organization. We facilitate this healthy vendor ecosystem, and have a lot of large enterprises that already trust our organization. And so, when organizations consider open sourcing, we invite them to bring it here. There's also a broad innovation platform that Linux Foundation provides. It's not just code, but there's also standards, open hardware, et cetera, as well, that you can do at the LF. And so that's essentially our argument for why open source can be helpful to advancing this new financial digital infrastructure that we see being built through use cases such as stablecoins, as you had that discussion last week, I heard, or central bank digital currency, which is governments getting involved in digitizing their currencies. So I want to share a little bit about how this is actually then happening in our community, in our space, using our technologies. And let me just check how things are going. How do central banks balance the transparency of open source development with the need for controlled? That's a really good question. I think that's something that a lot of central banks uh, are debating this, and this is what we're talking about with them. There isn't yet any open source central bank code project related to currency, but there are a lot that are leveraging open source, right? And so they are not projects that have necessarily developed in the open, but they have built on top of open source and are using the innovations and advancements that the technologies in our community are providing.
Hey, Karen, I think you're going to get to it in a second, but previously Partha asked, would be interested in CBDC use cases, and I'm pretty sure you're going to dive into that.
Yes, this is the
Awesome.
slide. I won't dive into many of these specific ones. I can include in the follow-up, you can get all these slides and also our ebook, which highlights each of these examples. But what I love about this map is it just shows you how much open source technology is being used for specifically the use case of central bank digital currencies, both wholesale and retail explorations. And some of these are research, POCs, experimental, but some are actually live pilots. So Bank of Nigeria has done a live pilot. Eastern Caribbean has as well. But whenever you hear about what Bank of Norway or Banque de France is doing, that's all leveraging open source technology. They use, and if it's not too obvious here, you can see the little logos of each of our technologies here on the side. They're using Besu, they're using Fabric, and in some cases, Cacti and Firefly as well. Europe especially has been using a lot of our technologies, but Asia as well. In addition, we've got some of these global collaborations like the Swift Sandbox, which included, I'm not gonna remember the number correctly, but like around 20 or so institutions and banks that were involved in that sandbox effort. There's a really good report around that. That are, multiple central banks coming together to test different use cases, test different types of transactions, interoperability as well. And so there's a lot of open source being leveraged here. Now, again, what I said earlier is like none of these have been, we don't have a CBDC project that's been contributed openly, but they have taken our Besu, Fabric, Firefly, etc., and built. Sorry, that was Siri. And built on top of it. And so each of these are, pursuant to the specific privacy, speed, scalability, levers that these different jurisdictions have. So while many probably have a common infrastructure, a common base, they're probably all very, very similar, which is why we are trying to encourage open contributions here. But there's a lot of specifics that each jurisdiction is focused on, and so they're very different projects. A few of these are the European Union is doing a significant effort in exploring a digital euro. They have three interoperability solutions that they're focused on. There's an Italian one, a German one, and a French one. And the German and French one both use our open source technologies. And so it's very exciting. They're being used if you read the reports, they're being used in all the different kinds of use case examples that they're testing to test different interoperability models. The Central Bank of Brazil selected Besu, which is a version of Ethereum. It's actually one of the main Ethereum clients that can be used in a private or permissioned or public way. And they're really taking the lead in pushing the envelope on how to develop a central bank digital currency. They're also really they've got some challenges with the privacy, but they're pushing a lot of innovation in the space for privacy to be adapted to this use case. So that there's a lot you can follow about what's happening there. I already mentioned the Swift Sandbox. And then Bank of Thailand, Monetary Authority of Singapore, a lot of the central banks in Asia have been very involved and active in this use case, but also in using open source. I just mentioned monetary authority. There's actually two initiatives here that are very interesting too, that are going beyond any one country deciding to do a CBDC. Monetary Authority of Singapore it has got this Project Guardian, which is to explore asset tokenization in DeFi for regulated financial markets. And they're leveraging Besu for that. And then Global Layer 1, which is an interoperability network for shared ledger infrastructure. And that's also leveraging Besu as well. So like I said, there's a lot going on in Asia around this. We then also have, getting a little bit outside of the current example, but just to talk about public sector using open source for creating digital public goods. We have a number of public permission networks that are using Besu in this example to provide a sort of general purpose infrastructure that enables a innovation in a blockchain ecosystem. So we have LACchain in Latin America that is supported by the Inter-American Development Bank, but LACchain is supporting different kinds of startups and businesses and all kinds of use cases to build on their network. We also have RBB, which is out of Brazil, which is focused on citizen services and transparency on government spending. Alastria is based out of Europe, as is EBSI, that is also working to provide sort of public sector blockchain services in Europe. So there's a number of public sector engagement in this use case.
Hey, Karen, if we could just quickly do two questions. Jerry K asked, is the IMF, International Monetary Fund, or the BIS, I believe that's Bank of International Settlement, involved in any of these experiments and projects?
Yes.
And are they
Yes.
interested in open source frameworks for common CBDC functions?
Yes. So let me go back here to the map here. Most of these are BIS projects, or maybe half are BIS projects. So project where you've got kind of the project name. Project Rosalind is a BIS project. Some of them are just the central bank themselves doing a project, but the BIS is very involved. And we've been talking with them very closely over the last 2 years, not just about CBDCs and using open source for this use case, but actually more broadly for open source to be a part of the BIS strategy overall in the work that they do, because they produce a lot of code, they produce a lot of projects, and those don't necessarily get shared. And so again, kind of getting back to why rebuild things over and over again when, if you've got common base infrastructure, it only makes sense to share that efficiently so that other projects can build on top of that instead of repeating the same work again. And then the IMF, they have a little bit different role. because they work with, a specific set of countries, and they do more advising. And I think they do experiments, but they're not um, uh, as involved in terms of these sort of public projects where they're releasing reports about it. But they are certainly working with the countries that are part of the IMF and advising them about CBDCs and what strategy they should take, et cetera.
Hey, Karen, Professor MDAD had a question. How can global open source community support inclusive innovation in CBDCs serving the unbanked and underbanked populations?
Well, I think, it's about getting involved in our projects, and participating in the projects themselves, because the more that we have examples and use cases, the more that these projects can actually meet the needs of those use cases, the more likely they will be used. In terms of, most central banks, although there's different goals, different jurisdictions have different priorities with what they would want a CBDC to do. But for countries where there is a strong unbanked population, I usually see those central banks having financial inclusion being a big goal, a major outcome of their CBDC, to provide a national currency that's easy to access, that allows people to onboard easily. And there is a challenge with the fact that it is digital. And so there are a number of explorations that are being done on how to do offline transactions, with various different options and solutions for those kinds of populations as well. But the World Bank has been doing a lot of research and exploration. They have a lot of activities in the space because that's an area that they're focused on. I know the Bank of Nigeria and Eastern Caribbean and Brazil, that's a big, India as well. That's a big focus of what they want to do. It is about financial inclusion. So in terms of how the open source community can support that, it's really, get involved and contribute to these projects to help them meet the needs of these use cases. Now I know we're kind of getting into time, so I just was going to talk here a little bit about Besu. Again, several of our technologies are being widely used. Fabric is being widely used in Firefly, Cacti as well. But Besu is kind of straddling very well both the governments, central banks that are looking to use it, and also specifically the financial institutions and banks. And so I wanted to just share a little bit about what people are doing with Besu there. It's being, widely used. And the reason why we think it's becoming very popular, especially among the financial services space, is because it serves this, there's a lot of multi-purpose aspects to what Besu can do. It is a client, it's an execution client on the Ethereum mainnet. About 16% of mainnet transactions run Besu. A lot of people don't realize that. It's used in layer 2 solutions. There's some, interoperability aspects, but I think a big part of it is there's this optionality of public and private. Most of these projects are private. There just isn't yet a privacy, but also scalability for this sort of use case that, again, is highly sensitive, highly reputational risk, et cetera. But what I think a lot of organizations appreciate is this ability to leverage the innovation of the Ethereum ecosystem that's happening in the public space, and also the optionality of, in the future, maybe when the technology catches up for privacy or scalability, et cetera, that there is this optionality to do things more publicly. And so some of the examples that we're seeing in the financial space with different kinds of banking institutions is Finality. If you haven't heard of this, this is a distributed financial infrastructure that's built on Besu in order to interop and connect many existing rails of payments and assets. They tokenize the assets, pool them among different nodes of the network, and then they can use them across the participating institutions. And you can see below there's Santander, BNY Mellon, Credit Suisse, Lloyd's, etc., Mizuho that are involved in this project. Citibank and the not too far away from me here in New York City, they have been using Besu for their trade services. So helping their trade finance and institutional cash management system. It's helped them be more available 24/7, allowing them to enhance cross-border payments and liquidity. It's streamlined various digital processes, reduced transaction times. There's a lot of good information out there about Citi's TTS if you're looking to learn more about that. There's also Universal Digital Payments Network, which is focused on interoperability, as is evident in the name as well. It's about connecting not just different stablecoins, but also CBDCs and providing this seamless connectivity for regulated digital currencies. It's essentially a messaging network for those regulated digital currencies and enables organizations to join and trial it out. This is an example of the BIS getting involved in using Besu for a non-CBDC use case. We have I think 2 different presentations that you can find on our YouTube related to this this example. That is really interesting because it's about sustainability for it's enabling green investments and helping the issuers and governments to meet those sustainability goals by tokenizing these green bonds and allowing them to see the interest, track in real time exactly how much energy is generated in this green bond market. So I encourage you to look that up as well, because that's a really interesting example. MasterCard also has their own solution built with Besu as well, which is this programmable payment platform that tokenizes customer deposits and allows you to integrate that with your bank money. Then we have in Asia, the Japan Securities Clearing Corporation. They have created a tokenized settlement for commodities futures. I think they currently have it for rubber and precious metals, and plan to add more commodities along the way in their roadmap. And so that's been kind of an exciting one because it's a little bit different than some of the other examples because it's about tokenizing commodities. As you can see, there's Sean there, there's me there, but that's our team. We are always here to help and support you to get involved in our community, understand the use cases, understand our technologies, how they're being used. Part of how we do that is these presentations. So thank you for having us. You can always reach out to us. We are always excited to talk about people who are interested, engaged, and getting involved. And as Sean said in the beginning, all are welcome. We have a Discord, we have YouTube, we have Meetups, we have online workshops, in-person events, etc. So please, feel free to come. Everybody's welcome. We would love to have you here. And I'll include these slides in the follow-up, and I have in the appendix more information about how to get involved and how to contribute if that's something that you're interested in. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
So much, Karen. And Professor, go ahead, you first.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Karen, on behalf of the National FinTech Center at Morgan. I would like to really express my appreciation for a very insightful and informative session. We also very appreciative of the work that Sean and the team at Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust is doing, and their continued support is really instrumental in advancing the mission of the center and making it impactful. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. I invite everyone to join us next week also. We have another session that is coordinated by Sean and the LFTD team. Thank you again. We appreciate it.
Yeah, so next Monday, the convergence of blockchain and AI, a new era for entertainment and digital ownership. Same time, different Zoom room. I'm going to repost the links right now. We have about 2 minutes. Karen, can you take one more question?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, someone post a question in chat. Moro, thank you for the kind words. That was very nice. Please don't put your email in there, buddy. Anybody else have a question for Karen before we jump? There was a question about Paladin going beyond Bezu to improve privacy. Jim, I did post the Paladin webinar in the response below that. I am trying to find the deck from the Paladin webinar. Partha, thank you very much. That's very kind of you to say, but all credit goes to Karen. She's the rock star here. Anyone else have a question for Karen before we shut down the Zoom?
Thanks, Partha. And
Going twice. Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you so much, Professor Emdad and the entire Morgan State team. Looking forward to seeing you all again next week. Thank you, everybody.
thank you all. Have a great day and hope to see you in the community.
Bye, y'all.